The boss was sure that the cleaning lady was stealing from him. Every night, she would sneak out with a heavy bag, nervously looking around. Tired of suspecting, he decided to follow her to finally catch her red-handed. He followed her through the streets to the poorest part of town, hoping to find proof of the crime. But when he looked through the window of her house, the scene he saw made him break down in tears of pure shame. Arthur Sterling was a ghost, haunting his own life. He moved through the halls of his mansion like a shadow, an echo of a man who had once known how to smile. The Italian marble beneath his feet, cold and unforgiving, reflected the high ceilings and the crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen tears. Every object, every painting on the wall, every piece of custom-designed furniture was a testament to his immense fortune. An empire built on the genius of turning stock market investments into rivers of money. He was a multi-millionaire, a man whose net worth was so vast that his account managers spoke in numbers that sounded more like astronomy than finance. But what good was all that wealth if the house, once a vibrant home filled with the laughter of Eleanor, his late wife, was now just a silent, opulent mausoleum? The loudest sound was his own breathing, a constant reminder of the solitude that consumed him. He had lost his greatest treasure, and no financial derivative, no extraordinary profit could fill the void she had left. It was on a grey Tuesday morning that he first noticed her. Not that she was new. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, had hired her a few weeks ago. But until then, she had been just another discreet part of the machinery that kept the mansion immaculate. Her name was Anna. She was quiet, almost invisible, gliding through the rooms with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. She didn't speak unless spoken to, and her movements were precise, economical, as if every gesture was calculated not to disturb the sepulchral silence of the house. Arthur watched her from the library doorway as she dusted the leather-bound books he hadn't opened in years. There was something in her posture, a rigidity in her shoulders that he knew well, and in her eyes. When for an instant she turned and her gaze met his, he saw it. It wasn't just fatigue or deference. It was a deep sorrow, an ancient pain that mirrored his own. He felt a pang of curiosity, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Who was this woman who carried a grief so much like his own? Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, a woman whose loyalty was as sharp as her tongue, did not share his curiosity. Her small, calculating eyes followed Anna with a poorly disguised suspicion. To Mrs. Davies, the mansion was her domain, and every new employee was a potential threat to her control. She saw Anna's quietness not as dignity, but as secrecy. She saw her efficiency not as professionalism, but as deceit. And that afternoon, as Arthur sipped his tea on the veranda, contemplating the vastness of his perfectly manicured garden, Mrs. Davies approached. Her face twisted into a mask of feigned concern. She smoothed her starched apron, a nervous tic that always preceded an unpleasant revelation. The way she stopped beside him, waiting to be noticed, sent a chill down Arthur's spine. He set down the porcelain cup, the gentle clink sounding like an alarm in the afternoon silence. He turned to her, bracing himself for whatever it was, but he wasn't prepared for the seed of poison she was about to plant in his already tormented mind. "Mr. Sterling, with all due respect," she began, her voice a conspiratorial whisper, "I need to speak to you about the new cleaning woman, about Anna." Arthur raised an eyebrow, his interest genuinely piqued. "I've noticed something strange," Mrs. Davies continued, inching a little closer, the lavender scent of her perfume becoming cloying. "Indeed, every night when she leaves, the bag she carries seems full, too heavy for someone just carrying their personal belongings." She paused dramatically, letting the words hang in the air. "And this morning, I noticed that some of the small silver items from the pantry, the ones Mrs. Eleanor was so fond of, they've simply vanished." Mrs. Davies' accusation echoed in the silence of the veranda, a dissonant note in the monotonous symphony of Arthur's life, silver. Eleanor's things, the suggestion of theft, of betrayal, was a poison that spread slowly through his veins. He looked at the housekeeper, at the satisfied glint in her small eyes, and felt a wave of irritation. He dismissed her with a curt gesture, his mind a maelstrom. Was it possible? Could that woman, with the sadness of a fallen angel in her eyes, be capable of such a base act? The idea repulsed him, but the seed of suspicion, once planted, began to sprout in the fertile soil of his loneliness and bitterness. In the days that followed, Arthur became an observer. He ceased to be a passive ghost and became a watchman in his own house. He watched Anna from afar, from dark corners, through half-open doors. He noticed how her hands, though deft and efficient, trembled slightly as she polished the mahogany banisters. He saw the dark circles under her eyes that discreet makeup barely concealed. He saw how she sometimes paused for a second, her eyes closed, taking a deep breath as if drawing strength from some secret place within her. Every detail, instead of confirming his suspicions, only deepened the mystery. There was an unbearable contradiction between the thief Mrs. Davies painted and the exhausted, dignified woman he saw. Mrs. Davies, sensing her employer's renewed interest, didn't miss the chance to stoke the flames. "And the small silver candlestick that was on the dining room sideboard is also missing, sir," she said casually one morning, while fluffing the pillows on the sofa where Arthur was sitting. Such a shame. It was such a delicate piece. She didn't accuse Anna directly. Her tactic was more subtle, more wicked. She simply pointed out the void, the absence, and let Arthur's mind fill in the blanks with Anna's name. The internal conflict ate away at him. He, a man who built an empire analyzing data, stock charts, and the cash flow of giant corporations, felt like a fool. His fortune was vast. His assets spread across the globe in gold, cryptocurrency, and investment funds. The value of those silver items was insignificant, a drop in the ocean of his net worth. It wasn't about the money, it was about the desecration. The idea that someone could enter his sanctuary, touch the things Eleanor had loved, and steal them was a violation he couldn't bear. It was a breach of the last barrier that protected him from the outside world. He spent hours in his office, the computer screens displaying the volatility of the stock market, the highs and lows of his investments. In the past, it had excited him, the dance of numbers, the high-stakes game he always won. Now, it all seemed hollow, meaningless. He looked at the performance charts and could only think of Anna's face. His thoughts oscillated violently. One moment, he condemned her, imagining her selling the silver pieces to support some secret vice. The next, he remembered those sad eyes and felt an overwhelming shame for even considering it. The image of her, so fragile yet so self-contained, didn't fit the profile of a common thief. She was an enigma, and the need to solve it began to turn into an obsession. He needed proof, something concrete to end the agony of doubt. It was then that he remembered the security cameras, discreetly installed throughout the mansion years ago. The technology he used to protect his material assets could now give him the truth about a human soul. The decision was made with a heavy heart. That night, he wouldn't sleep. He would go to the security room and watch the recordings. He would see with his own eyes if the woman with grief in her gaze was, in fact, a thief. The security room was a cold, windowless space in the mansion's basement, the technological heart that pulsed behind all the opulence. Arthur sat in the leather chair, the bluish glow of a dozen monitors illuminating his tense face. The air was thin, smelling of metal and electricity. With a few clicks of the mouse, he accessed the recordings from the past few days, focusing on the cameras covering the pantry and the corridors leading to the service exit. He fast-forwarded the images, time passing in a silent blur on the screen, and then he found her. Anna. The image was sharp, in high definition. He saw her in the pantry, just as Mrs. Davies had described. She was turned away from the camera, her movements quick and efficient as she wiped down the stainless steel countertops. He watched, his heart pounding, waiting for the moment she would slip a piece of silver into her bag. But the moment never came. The camera's angle didn't allow for a clear view of her hands. He saw her silhouette, saw the open bag on a nearby chair, but he couldn't see what she was putting inside. Minutes later, the footage showed her leaving through the back door, her bag visibly full, slung over her shoulder. The images confirmed Mrs. Davies's facts, but not the intent. The proof was circumstantial, frustratingly inconclusive. He spent hours there, reviewing every second, switching cameras, trying to find an angle, a reflection, anything that would give him certainty. But there was nothing, just a woman doing her job and going home with a heavy bag. Frustration mingled with a growing sense of shame. What was he doing? Spying on one of his employees, a man whose fortune could buy the company that made this surveillance equipment, obsessed with the possibility of a petty theft. He thought of Eleanor, with her generous heart, who always saw the best in people. She would be horrified to see him like this, consumed by suspicion, allowing Mrs. Davies's bitterness to poison his home. He felt small, petty. His business dealings were complex, involving the movement of capital in euros and dollars across continents, handling interest rates and liabilities that would make an ordinary man's head spin. He was a master in that universe of cold logic, but in the universe of the human heart, he was lost, stumbling in the dark. The next morning, he was exhausted and more confused than ever. The lack of concrete proof should have relieved him, but it only left him in a limbo of uncertainty. That's when Mrs. Davies approached, her face a mask of barely contained triumph. She held out her hand, and in her palm glinted a small silver spoon, soiled with dirt. "Look what I found in the garden, sir," she said, her voice dripping with false innocence. "Near the path Anna uses to leave. It must have fallen from her bag without her noticing." The blow was perfectly calculated. The spoon was the missing piece in Arthur's puzzle, the physical proof he had both sought and dreaded. The image of the spoon in her hand, dirty and abandoned, seemed to solidify all his suspicions. It was a sordid detail, irrefutable proof of the betrayal. The sadness in Anna's eyes, her silent dignity, it all seemed, in that instant, like an elaborate charade. Cold, sharp anger replaced doubt. He had been deceived in his own home, under the roof that had once sheltered his great love. He was being robbed by a woman whose sorrow he had almost mistaken for honesty. The decision formed in his mind, hard and unyielding. He wouldn't confront her yet. He would wait. He would catch her in the act, and her humiliation would be his revenge. The discovery of the silver spoon changed everything. An ice curtain descended over the Sterling mansion, and the epicenter of that coldness was Arthur himself. The warmth of doubt, the agony of uncertainty, were replaced by a frigid certainty that stiffened his posture and made his gaze sharp. He no longer spoke to Anna. Their paths would cross in the long hallways, and he would pass her as if she were part of the furniture, invisible, insignificant. But she felt the weight of his stare. It was a physical pressure, a silent judgment that followed her through every room, making each task a burden. She didn't understand the change. In the early days, he had watched her with an almost melancholic curiosity. Now, he watched her with contempt. What had she done? Fear began to gnaw at her, a constant fear of losing this job, the only line separating her from absolute desperation. In response to the silent pressure, Anna redoubled her efforts. She arrived earlier, left later. She cleaned with a feverish meticulousness, polishing the silver until her own distorted reflection stared back at her, eyes full of an anxiety she couldn't confess to anyone. Every gleaming surface, every spotless floor was a silent plea. "Please, don't fire me. I need this." Inside her, the world was a storm. While her hands worked automatically, her mind traveled far away, to a small room in a humble neighborhood, to the soft, steady sound of a machine that was, at once, the soundtrack of life and fragility. She remembered a different time, not so long ago, when her son Michael's laughter echoed through the house. A flashback hit her with the force of a wave, a picnic in a park, the warm sun on her face, Michael chasing a ball, his blonde hair shining, his pure, crystalline laughter filling the air. He tripped and fell, scraping his knee. The tears came, but she hugged him, kissed the wound, and in seconds, the crying turned to laughter again. It was so simple back then. The world was a place of scraped knees that could be healed with a kiss. Now, the world was a labyrinth of medical bills, of terms she didn't understand, of a fear that woke her in the middle of the night, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her salary from the mansion was the only thing keeping the small flame of hope alive. It was the money that paid for the rent, the food, and the oxygen her son breathed. Arthur, oblivious to all this, nurtured his own anguish. The certainty of betrayal brought him no peace, only a corrosive bitterness. He felt like a fool for having been touched by her apparent sadness. He locked himself in his office, trying to distract himself with his vast financial empire. He analyzed the performance of his stocks, planned new investments, but the satisfaction he once felt watching his portfolio grow had vanished. Wealth seemed like a bad joke. He had the capital to buy and sell companies, to influence markets, but inside his own home, he felt powerless and betrayed over a few pieces of metal. One afternoon, he found her in the library, carefully cleaning a jade statuette that Eleanor had brought back from a trip to Asia. He stopped at the door, watching her. Anger and pain mixed inside him, a toxic combination. He had to say something to break the suffocating silence. "Is everything in order here, Anna?" he asked, his voice coming out colder and harsher than he'd intended. The question hung in the air, laden with a hidden meaning they both perfectly understood. Anna froze, her hand hovering over the statuette. She turned slowly, her face pale. His eyes were like two shards of glass. She swallowed hard, her heart racing. He knew. Somehow, he knew. But what did he know? The truth or the lie someone had told? "Yes, sir. Everything is in perfect order." Anna's voice was a mere thread, fragile but firm. The lie felt heavy on her tongue, but what else could she say? Confess that she took leftover food every night. Admit that her life was a desperate struggle for her son's survival. In her world, the truth was a luxury she couldn't afford. The truth would get her fired, and getting fired would be a sentence. Arthur stared at her a moment longer, his eyes scanning her face for a crack in her composure. He found none, just the same mask of weary dignity. He turned and left without another word, leaving her with a hammering heart and trembling hands. The brief confrontation left her deeply shaken. The security of her job, already so precarious, now seemed to hang by a thread. Later that day, the thread was pulled tighter. Mrs. Davies cornered her in the laundry room, the smell of soap and bleach heavy in the air. "Mr. Sterling values honesty above all else," the housekeeper said, folding a sheet with threatening precision. "People who hide things, who aren't loyal, they don't last long in this house. A house with so many valuable assets needs trust." The threat was clear, wrapped in false concern. Mrs. Davies was enjoying herself, savoring the fear she saw in Anna's eyes. Meanwhile, Arthur was fighting his own battle. The brief, unsatisfying confrontation with Anna had brought him no relief. On the contrary, her calmness had unsettled him. He had expected a vehement denial, tears, a confession, but he got only a polite, controlled response, which, to his poisoned mind, seemed the mark of a practiced liar. He retreated to his office, the mausoleum of his solitude. The screens glowed with quotes for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, digital assets that existed only as code but were worth a fortune. He looked at the numbers, at the rising and falling charts, and felt a profound disgust with himself. He, Arthur Sterling, a billionaire whose opinion was sought by titans of industry, was being consumed by a domestic drama. He reviewed his portfolio, the investments in international funds, the treasury bonds, the generational wealth he had multiplied exponentially. None of it mattered. The numbers were cold, empty. They couldn't fill the silence of the house or ease the pain in his chest. The betrayal he felt wasn't about the monetary value of the objects. It was about the breach of trust, the stain on Eleanor's memory. He felt he was failing her, allowing ugliness and dishonesty to seep into the sanctuary they had built together. The bitterness was like a cancer devouring what was left of his peace. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly trimmed garden. The order and beauty outside contrasted with the chaos inside him. He was tired of feeling this way, tired of Mrs. Davies's insinuations, of the inconclusive camera footage, of his own paralyzing uncertainty. He was a man of action. He had built his fortune by making bold decisions based on instinct and analysis, and that's what he would do now. He needed the truth, not a version filtered through a jealous housekeeper or the lens of a camera. He needed to see with his own eyes, hear with his own ears. The idea formed in his mind, bold and definitive. He wouldn't confront her in the mansion again. He wouldn't back her into a corner with accusations. He would discover her secret on her own territory. He would follow her. The decision filled him with a dark energy, a purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. It would be the end of this anguish. Tonight, he would have his answer. He would follow her to the ends of the earth if he had to unmask the truth behind those sad eyes. The day dragged on with torturous slowness. For Arthur, each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was another step toward the final confrontation. He moved through the house like an automaton, performing the routines of his empty life. He took a call from his banker in Zurich, discussing the allocation of a few million euros into a new investment fund. He read the quarterly reports from his major holdings, analyzing dividends and stock performance. But his mind wasn't there. It was on the silent woman who moved through his house, cleaning away the traces of a life that was no longer lived. He watched her from the corner of his eye, her every movement stoking the furnace of his anger. The way she arranged the books on the shelf, the way she wiped down the grand piano that no one played anymore. It all seemed like a performance, a calculated act to win his trust while she betrayed him behind his back. The idea of being made a fool of in his own house, the sanctuary he had built to protect himself and Eleanor's memory, was an intolerable offense. After losing so much, the thought that someone was taking even more from him, even if it was just crumbs from his immense wealth, was unbearable. As late afternoon settled in, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Arthur watched her finish her shift. Anna looked more exhausted than usual. There was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. She moved through the kitchen, gathering her things. He saw her pick up the canvas tote bag, the same bag he'd seen on the security camera footage. He watched her place something inside, something wrapped in cloth napkins. The rage momentarily blinded him. This was it, the proof. He pictured the silver pieces inside, wrapped to keep them from clattering. The plan was sealed. He waited 15 minutes after she left, an interval that felt like an eternity. Then he took the keys to one of his less conspicuous cars, a discreet, dark sedan, and slipped out through the back garage. He hadn't driven that car in years. It was a relic from a time when he still enjoyed driving without being noticed. Tonight, anonymity was his ally. He parked at the corner under the shadow of a large oak tree and waited. Soon, Anna's slender figure appeared, walking toward the bus stop on the main avenue. Her head was down, and she walked with a weary haste. When the bus arrived and she boarded, Arthur started the engine, its soft rumble breaking the silence of the elegant street. He kept a safe distance, following the large, brightly lit vehicle as it pulled away from the wealthy neighborhood and plunged into the arteries of the city. He felt like a predator stalking his prey, his heart hammered in his chest, a mix of adrenaline, anger, and a strange, almost painful excitement. What would he find at the end of this journey? A pawn shop, an accomplice. At every bus stop, he braced for her to get off, but she continued, going deeper and deeper into neighborhoods he only knew from the urban development maps for his real estate ventures. Finally, after nearly an hour, she got off. The street was poorly lit, the houses small and modest, some in need of a fresh coat of paint. The contrast with his mansion was brutal. Anna walked for 2 more blocks and turned onto a narrow street. Arthur parked the car and followed her on foot, the soles of his expensive shoes making an oddly loud sound on the uneven pavement. She entered a small house at the end of the street. He waited, hidden in the shadows, his heart pounding against his ribs. He approached the house, moving with a caution he usually reserved for multi-million-dollar negotiations. He had to see. He needed the final proof. He crept to the front window, the thin curtain offering a hazy view of the interior. Arthur's heart was racing, a wild drum in his chest. The adrenaline of the chase and the anticipation of the confrontation left him breathless. He leaned in, adjusting his angle to see through a gap in the frayed curtain. The dim, yellowed light from inside the house revealed a scene that was not part of any scenario he had imagined. There was no pawned silver, no accomplice, no sordidness of a thief's hideout. There was only a small, simple room, furnished with the bare essentials: a table, 2 chairs, a worn-out sofa, and in the center of it all was the truth. A truth so devastating it hit him like a physical force, knocking the air from his lungs. Anna was on her knees on the floor. The canvas bag, the evidence of her supposed crime, lay open at her feet. But there was no silver, no candlesticks, no valuables. The contents of the bag were food, leftovers from the luxurious dinner Arthur's chef had prepared the night before: slices of roast beef, asparagus, a piece of pie. She was carefully transferring the food onto small plates, and the recipient of this makeshift feast was lying on a makeshift bed in the corner of the room. It was a boy, a small, pale, thin boy, no older than 7 or 8. His blonde hair was matted to his sweaty forehead, and his eyes, large and deep, were fixed on his mother with a mixture of exhaustion and adoration. Next to the bed, a green metal cylinder hissed softly, connected by a thin tube to the boy's nose, an oxygen tank. The entire scene unfolded in a silence that screamed louder than any accusation. Anna wasn't stealing. She was surviving. She was fighting. She wasn't taking Eleanor's silver. She was taking the scraps from Arthur's opulence to feed her sick child. The castle of anger and suspicion Arthur had built in his mind crumbled in an instant, turning into a pile of rubble of shame and self-loathing. Every look of contempt he had given her, every cold word, every silent accusation came back to haunt him. He, the man who measured his life in profits and assets, who spent more on a single dinner than could sustain this family for a year, stood there, judging a desperate mother. The arrogance of his grief, the belief that his suffering was the only one that mattered in the world, shattered against the window of that humble house. He stumbled back from the window, his hand flying to his mouth to stifle a sob that threatened to escape. He leaned against the cold wall of the house, his body trembling. The tears he hadn't shed since Eleanor's death came with overwhelming force. They weren't tears of sorrow, but of a shame so profound it burned him from the inside out. He saw everything with a terrible clarity. He saw Mrs. Davies not as a loyal employee, but as a bitter, envious woman, weaving lies to destroy someone she saw as a threat. And he saw Anna. He saw her truly for the first time, not as the cleaning woman, not as the suspect, but as a silent hero, fighting a daily battle with a strength and dignity he had never known. In that moment, under the dim light of a street lamp in a forgotten neighborhood, the great Arthur Sterling, the multi-millionaire, the titan of industry, felt like the poorest, most despicable creature on earth. The truth he had so desperately sought was not a weapon to use against her, but a mirror reflecting his own moral bankruptcy. He didn't know what to do, but he knew he couldn't just walk away. The chase was over, but a new, much harder journey was just beginning. Arthur drove back to the mansion in a trance. The city lights blurred past, and the powerful engine of the car was a distant hum. The man who had left the house hours earlier, driven by cold rage and a twisted sense of justice, no longer existed. In his place was a stranger, a man emptied of his arrogance and filled with an overwhelming shame. He parked in the garage, but remained in the car, his hands trembling on the leather steering wheel. The image of that room, of the pale little boy and the unshakable love on Anna's face, was seared into his mind. He finally got out of the car and entered the house. The mansion's silence, which had once been a source of melancholy comfort, now felt accusatory. Every luxury item, every work of art, every square foot of wasted space mocked him. He found Mrs. Davies in the kitchen, supervising the final cleanup. She turned as he entered, a self-satisfied smile on her lips, awaiting the verdict, the confirmation of her suspicions. "Well, sir?" she asked, malicious curiosity gleaming in her eyes. "Did you find out whether things have been going?" Arthur stared at her, and for the first time, he saw the true ugliness behind her efficient facade. He didn't shout, didn't accuse her. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously calm, devoid of all emotion. "Mrs. Davies, where is the silver candlestick from the dining room?" The question caught her off guard. "As I said, sir, it's missing." "And the spoon you found in the garden?" he continued. His eyes locked on hers. "Where is it now?" It's in the pantry. I cleaned it and put it away. Bring it to me. And the rest of the flatware set it belongs to." Confused but obedient, Mrs. Davies went to fetch the items. She returned and placed them on the marble countertop. Arthur took the found spoon and compared it to the others. The monogram, the weight, the design, they were identical. But then he turned it over and pointed to a minuscule maker's mark near the base, visible only to a trained eye. "This flatware was a gift from a business partner in Vienna," he said, his voice still deathly calm. "It was made by a small Austrian silversmith. The spoon you found," he held it up, "was made in Mexico. It's an excellent replica, but a replica nonetheless. Where is the original, Mrs. Davies?" The housekeeper's face fell apart. The color drained from her cheeks, and panic replaced her arrogance. She stammered, tried to form an excuse, but the words wouldn't come. Arthur didn't need a confession. The truth was stamped across her terrified face. She had hidden the original pieces and planted the false accusations, all out of jealousy and spite. "Pack your things. I want you out of this house in 1 hour," he said, his voice final, leaving no room for appeal. He turned and left her there. Amidst the ruins of her lies, he went up to his office, the place where he felt most powerful, but now he felt like an imposter. He sat in his chair, surrounded by the symbols of his heritage and his assets, but the only thing he could think about was the poverty of his own character. He hadn't just been deceived by Mrs. Davies, he had allowed himself to be deceived. His grief had made him blind and cruel. He spent the rest of the night not looking at the stock market, but at his computer screen, researching the best pediatric hospitals, the leading experts in pulmonary diseases in the country. The money, which for so long had been just a way of keeping score, of accumulating a pointless fortune, finally had a purpose. He didn't know how he would approach Anna, didn't know how to repair the damage he had done, but he knew he would use every cent of his vast capital to change the end of her story. The next day, the mansion seemed to breathe a different air. Mrs. Davies' absence was a palpable silence, lighter and less oppressive than the silence that had preceded her. When Anna arrived for work, she found the house strangely quiet. She braced for the worst, expecting that the housekeeper's absence meant she would be the next to be dismissed. But Arthur acted as if nothing had happened. He greeted her with a brief "good morning," his voice devoid of the coldness of the past few days. There was something new in his eyes. Not warmth, not yet, but the hostility was gone, replaced by a kind of exhaustion, almost reverence. This subtle shift was more disconcerting than open anger. Anna spent the day on high alert, every footstep of Arthur's in the halls making her hold her breath. The uncertainty was torture. Why was Mrs. Davies gone? What did her employer know? The bag she carried home seemed to weigh twice as much, filled not just with food, but with the weight of her secret and her fear. Arthur, for his part, felt like a coward. He spent the entire morning rehearsing a speech in his mind, trying to find the right words to approach her. "I know everything." No, too accusatory. "I want to help." No, too patronizing. Every phrase he formulated sounded false, inadequate for the depth of his mistake and her dignity. How could he apologize for suspecting her, for hunting her like a criminal, when she was fighting such a noble battle? He watched her from a distance, no longer with suspicion, but with an admiration that left him speechless. He saw the strength in her delicacy, the resilience in her weariness. He, a man accustomed to commanding, to giving orders and watching the world bend to his will and his financial power, felt completely disarmed before this woman. His vast repertoire of negotiation and persuasion, which had earned him billions in complex deals, was useless. This wasn't a business transaction. It was a matter of humanity, an area where his cash flow was shamefully negative. By late afternoon, his cowardice gave way to a desperate idea. If he couldn't speak, maybe his money could. It was the language he mastered, an imperfect, impersonal solution, but it was a start. It was a way to act, to do something tangible, instead of drowning in his own guilt. He went to his personal safe, a compartment hidden behind a painting in his office. He withdrew a thick stack of $100 bills, a significant amount, enough to cover medical expenses for several months, maybe even a year. It was an insignificant fraction of his daily income, less than the interest his capital generated in a single hour, but for her, he hoped, it would be a lifeline. He put the money in a plain manila envelope, no return address, no note. Anonymity, he thought, would spare her the humiliation of accepting charity from a man who had treated her so poorly. He waited until she was cleaning the living room on the other side of the mansion. Then he went quickly down to the kitchen, his heart pounding like a thief's. He looked around the impeccably clean kitchen and placed the envelope on the granite countertop, right in the center, where she couldn't miss it. It was a clumsy gesture, a silent, cowardly apology, but it was all he could manage. He retreated into the shadows of the hallway and waited, the fate of his first act of redemption depending on what she would do next. Anna entered the kitchen to get her things at the end of the day, her mind already on the long bus ride and the care Michael would need that night. Her eyes immediately landed on the manila envelope on the counter. It looked out of place in the pristine kitchen. For a moment, she thought it was some work instruction left for her. She approached, and the thickness of the envelope made her hesitate. With trembling hands, she picked it up. It was heavy. She opened it, and what she saw made her step back as if she'd been shocked. Money. An amount of money she had never seen up close in her entire life. Panic seized her instantly, icy and overwhelming. This wasn't help. It was a trap. A test. Mr. Sterling, suspecting her, had left the money there to see if she would take it. If the envelope disappeared, he would have his final proof that she was a thief. The idea was so cruel, so perverse, it took her breath away. The change in his behavior during the day, Mrs. Davies's sudden departure, it all clicked into place in her mind, like the pieces of a diabolical plan to expose her. She closed the envelope, her hands sweating, her heart racing. Her first instinct was to simply leave it where it was, to pretend she had never seen it, but that would be suspicious too. She had to prove her innocence, show that she wasn't the person they thought she was. The only option was to turn in the money. But to whom? Mr. Sterling intimidated her. She could barely look him in the eye, let alone approach him with an envelope full of cash. Her panicked brain searched for the authority figure she knew, Mrs. Davies. But Mrs. Davies wasn't there. Who was in charge? The agency? No, that would take too long. Then she heard footsteps. Arthur was coming down the main staircase. It was now or never. Clasping the envelope, she left the kitchen and met him in the grand entrance hall. He stopped when he saw her, his face a mask of expectation. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to keep it steady. "I found this in the kitchen. I believe you must have forgotten it." She held the envelope out to him. Arthur looked from the envelope in her hand to her face, and his heart sank. He saw the fear in her eyes, the terrified sincerity, and understood instantly how terribly his plan had failed. He hadn't helped her, he had terrorized her. He had insulted her, treating her like a problem that could be solved with an anonymous payment, like a transaction in one of his many deals. He felt like a complete fool. "No, Anna, that's not mine," he began, his voice hoarse. "It's for you." The confusion on her face deepened. "For me? But why? I don't understand." "It's a bonus for your excellent work," he improvised, the lie sounding weak even to his own ears. But the word bonus didn't reassure her. On the contrary, it seemed to confirm her suspicions. Such a large payment for no apparent reason. Nobody did that. "I can't accept this, sir," she said, pushing the envelope further toward him. "I only do my job. Please, take it back." Her dignity was an impenetrable wall. He realized with humiliating clarity that he couldn't hide behind his fortune. His wealth, his power, everything that defined him in the outside world was useless here in this hallway. If he wanted to fix this, he would have to use something he hadn't used in a very long time. Himself. He would have to tear down his own walls, be vulnerable, be honest. He looked at her face, at the strength and fear warring in her eyes, and made the most terrifying decision of his life. He would go to her house, that very night, not to spy, but to introduce himself, to speak the truth. That night, Arthur drove back to Anna's humble neighborhood, but this time, the journey was completely different. There was no anger, no suspicion, only a deep fear and a fragile determination. He parked the car on the same street, but instead of skulking in the shadows, he walked directly to the small, lit house, each step on the uneven pavement echoing the nervous beat of his heart. He stopped before the simple wooden door, its peeling paint revealing the scars of time. He could hear the soft sound of a television inside and the constant hum of the oxygen machine. He took a deep breath, the cool night air filling his lungs, and raised his hand to knock. The sound of the knock seemed absurdly loud in the quiet street. The sounds inside stopped. He heard footsteps approaching, and then the door opened. Anna stood there, her face pale with exhaustion under the dim porch light. When she saw him, a whirlwind of emotions crossed her eyes. Shock, confusion, and above all, paralyzing fear. She gripped the edge of the door as if to steady herself. His presence there at her door was the confirmation of her worst nightmares. He had come to fire her, to accuse her in front of her son. "Mr. Sterling," she whispered, her voice nearly inaudible. What are you doing here?" He saw the panic on her face, and guilt struck him anew. "Anna, please, I'm sorry for showing up like this," he began, his voice lower and more uncertain than he'd intended. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to talk to you." He glanced past her, into the small room he had only seen through the window. It was impeccably clean, but the furniture was old and worn. He could see the makeshift bed in the corner, the small body lying under a thin blanket. "May I come in?" Please, just for a minute." Her hesitation was a physical barrier between them. She was protecting her sanctuary, her son, from the man she believed to be her tormentor. "I know everything." "Anna," he said softly, the phrase he had once dreaded saying, now uttered with a tone of supplication. "I know about your son, and I know you didn't steal anything. I was wrong, and I am so sorry. More than words can say." The sincerity in his voice, the pain in his eyes, took her by surprise. It wasn't the look of the furious boss she had expected. It was the look of a man who was broken. The truth in his words disarmed her. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. She studied him for a long moment, her mind trying to process this impossible turn of events. How do you know?" she asked, her voice still a whisper. "I followed you," he admitted, the confession burning in his throat. "I saw through the window. I was a blind, arrogant fool, and there's no excuse for what I did. But the reason I'm here now is because I want to help. For real, not with an anonymous envelope, but as a person." He looked again toward the bed. The sound of the oxygen machine seemed to fill the entire space between them. "I lost someone I loved very much," he said, his voice cracking for the first time. "I know what it's like to be afraid. I know what it's like to feel alone." That confession of his own pain was the key that finally unlocked the door. Anna saw, for the first time, not the multimillionaire, but a fellow mourner, a man as lonely as she was. She slowly stepped back, opening the door. It wasn't a full invitation, but a permission, a beginning. Arthur stepped into her world, and as the door closed behind him, he felt he was leaving behind not just the cold of the night, but the long, icy solitude of his own life. He looked at the boy on the bed, the reason for all this struggle and all this love, and asked the most important question of his life, "May I see him?" Anna hesitated for only a second before nodding. She walked ahead, guiding him across the small space to the corner where Michael rested. The boy, who had been dozing, slowly opened his eyes at the presence of a stranger. They were his mother's eyes, large and expressive, but clouded with the weariness of his illness. Arthur stopped beside the bed, his hands in his pockets so they wouldn't see them tremble. He had expected to feel pity, perhaps discomfort in the face of sickness, but what he felt was a wave of instant connection. He didn't just see a frail boy, he saw a little warrior. There was a light in that gaze, a spark of curiosity and spirit that the illness hadn't managed to extinguish. "Hello," Arthur said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He crouched down to be at the boy's eye level. "My name is Arthur." "I'm Michael," the boy replied, his voice a little breathless but clear. "Are you my mum's boss?" The direct, innocent question broke the tension. Arthur smiled, a genuine smile, the first in years. "Yes, I am, and she's the best employee I've ever had." Anna's face softened, and a faint blush colored her cheeks. Arthur stayed there, talking with Michael. He didn't speak with the condescension of an adult talking to a sick child, but with the genuine interest of an equal. He asked about his favorite cartoons, about the books his mother read to him, about the superheroes he admired most. Michael, initially shy, began to open up, responding with an enthusiasm his physical condition could barely contain. Anna watched the scene, her heart a mixture of astonishment and relief. She saw a side of Arthur Sterling she had never imagined existed. The facade of the cold, distant billionaire had crumbled, revealing a man with an unexpected kindness and a sadness she now understood. She realized that his loneliness was as real and as deep as her own. They were two shipwrecked souls who, by a twist of fate, had found themselves in the same storm. After a few minutes, Arthur stood up and turned to Anna. "I spent last night researching," he said, his voice low but filled with a new authority, not the authority of a boss, but of a man with a plan. "There's a specialist in Boston, the best in the world for cases like Michael's. I've already contacted the hospital. They're waiting for you." Anna stared at him, stunned. Boston, the best in the world. It was a universe so far removed from her reality it felt like science fiction. But the cost, I have no way, she began to stammer. Money is not an issue, he interrupted her gently. Don't think about that. Think of this as an investment, the most important investment I will ever make. He saw the hesitation, the pride warring with hope in her eyes. Anna, this isn't charity, he said, taking a step closer. I've spent the last few years building walls around myself, living in a gilded cage. You and Michael, you've shown me just how poor I really am. Let me do this, not for you, but for me. I need this. In that moment, the emotional barriers they had both so carefully erected began to crumble. She no longer saw the boss who had accused her, and he no longer saw the employee he had suspected. They saw each other, two wounded people, brought together by shared pain and the possibility of a mutual healing. The tears Anna had been holding back finally escaped, not of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming relief. She nodded, just once, the answer to the question he hadn't even needed to ask. Yes, she accepted. And in that silent yes, in that small room warmed by a mother's love and a man's redemption, a new family began to be born. From that night on, Anna and Michael's world was turned upside down in the best possible way. Arthur acted with the speed and efficiency of a general commanding a military operation. In less than 48 hours, a private jet was waiting for them. Michael, who had never seen an airplane up close, stared with wide eyes, excitement overcoming fear. Arthur handled every detail. From travel documents to ensuring a medical team was on board to monitor Michael during the flight. To Anna, it all felt like a fever dream. She moved through the events, guided by Arthur's firm, reassuring hand. Upon arriving in Boston, a new life awaited them. Michael was immediately admitted to the most advanced hospital she had ever seen, a place that looked more like a five-star hotel than a medical institution. Arthur had rented a comfortable, sunny apartment just a few blocks from the hospital so Anna could stay close to her son. The weeks turned into months. Arthur flew to Boston constantly, using the excuse that he needed to oversee the investment. But they both knew it was more than that. He spent hours at the hospital, not as a distant benefactor, but as a friend. He brought Michael toys, read him stories, and challenged him to video games, often losing on purpose to see the victorious smile on the boy's face. With Anna, a new and delicate relationship blossomed. In the long hours in hospital waiting rooms, they talked. She told him about her life, about Michael's father who had abandoned them, about her dreams and fears. He, in turn, opened his heart for the first time since Eleanor's death. He spoke of his loneliness, of the emptiness his fortune couldn't fill, and of the guilt he felt for having closed himself off from the world. They discovered that, despite the vast differences in their circumstances, their souls spoke the same language. The attraction he had felt for her, born of curiosity and suspicion, transformed into deep admiration and, finally, into a tender, overwhelming love. He fell in love with her strength, her integrity, and the beauty of her resilient soul. And she, who had once seen him as only a distant, intimidating boss, found a broken-hearted man as vulnerable and in need of connection as she was. One day, as they watched Michael sleep peacefully after a successful treatment, Arthur took Anna's hand. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, his voice low, "but I know I don't want to face it without you and Michael by my side." Anna looked at their intertwined hands, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel genuine hope. She didn't reply with words, only squeezed his hand, a gesture that held all the promise of a new beginning. The conflicts that had separated them, suspicion, social inequality, fear, had been resolved, not by the power of money, but by the strength of compassion and shared vulnerability. They were healing together. A year later, the Sterling mansion was no longer a silent mausoleum. The sound that now echoed through the marble halls was not that of lonely footsteps, but of a child's laughter. Michael, now 9, ran through the vast garden, his lungs strong and healthy, chasing a soccer ball with an energy that seemed infinite. The treatment in Boston had been a miraculous success. He was completely healed, a vibrant child full of life. The house, once cold and impersonal, had been transformed into a home. Colorful toys dotted the sober decor. Children's drawings were proudly displayed on the stainless steel refrigerator door, and the smell of cake baking in the oven often replaced the scent of beeswax and lemon. Anna was no longer the cleaning woman. She was the lady of the house, but she carried her new role with the same grace and humility as always. She and Arthur had married in a simple, private ceremony, with Michael as the proud best man. Their love, forged in pain and mistrust, had become the solid foundation of their lives. Arthur was a changed man. The ghost that haunted his own life had vanished, replaced by a man who had learned to smile again. His businesses and investments continued to thrive, his net worth reaching billionaire status. But his perspective had fundamentally shifted. He was still a master of the financial world, but his focus was no longer solely on profit. He established a foundation in Eleanor's and Michael's names, dedicated to providing cutting-edge medical treatment to children from low-income families. He discovered that the greatest return on investment came not from stocks and bonds, but from the glint of hope in a grateful mother's eyes. His greatest wealth was no longer in his assets, but in Michael's tight hugs and the soft touch of Anna's hand in his. He had found a purpose that money alone could never buy. That sunny afternoon, Arthur and Anna sat on the veranda, watching Michael play. A gentle breeze rustled the trees, and the sound of the boys' laughter was the perfect soundtrack. "Do you remember the first time you really saw me?" Anna asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "Through that window." Arthur flinched slightly at the memory of the shame he had felt. "I'll never forget it," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "It was the worst and the best night of my life. It was the night I realized I was completely bankrupt, despite all my billions, and it was the night I found my greatest treasure." He turned to her, the love in his eyes clear and deep. She was no longer a mystery, but his certainty. He was no longer a broken man, but a whole one. Together they had built a new family, not based on inheritance or blood, but on compassion, forgiveness, and the miraculous discovery that true love is sometimes hidden in the humblest of places, just waiting to be found. The scene at the window had not been the end of a suspicion, but the beginning of everything.